for episode 5 in this first painting series. I'm going to get down to some of the tighter details here. So we've got the finished one on the right, and what we're going to do is work on some of the freehand things. And if you remember, we really wanted to emphasize working on this champion here. We made the decision to go with the green object source lighting and making the familiar have an interior glow to it. For the most part, we'll focus on this one right here, so you get to see, kind of get a sneaky object source lighting lesson in there, because you've seen how we approach the gold and the face and other things. This is sort of a specialty thing, so we're going to want to really focus on this and then make that decision on which of these goes onto which base. We talked about that in the basing video, but sometimes when you actually see them on there, you say, maybe I want to put these on a different base. You know, maybe, I think it was this one we had planned out for this because it's more of a long tail here. That's a little better. You can see the size comparison there. And also, some are going to have a bigger footprint than others. So this one, while it's small as far as how expansive it is, it's got sort of a big footprint here, even though it has no feet. So this might cover up an awful lot of this nifty design. So we'll pop them off the dowel rods and we'll see just what we want to do with those. So what I'm going to do is lay out some of the colors on the palette here. A little review. We had some of our secret weapon colors here, all in the weathering series. We also have our fluorescent paint. Always like to combine it with the clear green. We've got our Reaper off-whites that I really enjoy here. Basically a cooler off-white and a warmer off-white. And then some key liner paints here, the red liner and blue liner. We use that an awful lot for our shading and glazing. And then a few other colors that these we mix in with that old rust. And that's what's given us sort of a purplish type feel. I've even got some clear purple if I feel like I need a brighter accent color here and there. The same old review on the brushes. So again, when they're newer, more pristine, they have a tendency to be this sharp point. And we also have our filberts. At this stage, we're a little bit past the filberts here. I'm going to be focusing more on these, and we'll even bring out some of the, some of the Winsor Newton, some of the sable brushes too. So we will be back with the paint on the palette and a brush in hand next. Let's get to work on some of these patterns here. And I'm going to work this both ways. From adding some darks, like what we're going to do here. Just want to make sure that's on camera for you. It's more than just adding some darks, it's also maybe trying to solidify some parts of the pattern here too. You can see this is done in kind of a transparent way here. It's what the liner paints do really well. They hold up, they have just so much pigment in them that you can get a nice thin line out of these. But yet, see how it's definitely darkening down what we need to have shaded. Not going to mess around too much with where we have the object source lighting. But this is that part of the process where you start to go after the details. We did all that, the bulk work before with the shaded base coat, and then we try to take advantage of that with some glazing. See, we can do some minor glazing here. So I'm going to take some of this and tone it down with water. And in this spot right here, I'm going to glaze that down, try and restore some of these lines. Here's I can still remove with a finger there if I want. Remember, some of these had some really tricky areas, some really tricky spots as far as how that, the actual snake part of the body, if you want to call it that, how that bent and changed directions. Even talked a little bit about zebra. So here's a little bit of the object source layer, or the non-metallic sneaking in here as we try and make that horizon line as dark as possible. Gonna go with a little bit of dark over the eyes here. And this is another one of those reasons why I don't get too involved with details right away, so I can make key changes if I need to. And you can see I just randomly just started into throwing some glazes in other places. It just struck me that, yeah, let's do a darker glaze here. And I'm pretty sure that's mostly just red line around there, but I didn't sweat it. I wasn't worried about exactly matching a color. Now see here, it looks like this is either a, yeah, it's some type of a gauntlet. So just to remind myself, I got some of this, I think it's orange rust. Yeah, it is orange rust. I'm going to throw a tiny bit of that. And this is one of those adjustments that you make, and I just want to throw this out there just to let myself know. Doing the same thing here. I just wanted to get in some more intense golds in certain places, and at the actually the tip of this tail here. I also want that to be more of a gold. Over here, that's kind of sort of covered by the object source lighting. And here, see, I didn't even clean out the brush, so I've got some of that red liner paint and the orange rust mixed together. So it's almost a little bit of a glaze right there. I think one of the reasons I'm just trying to sneak in some of this object source lighting and some of the metallic is just to make it seem a little less like it's this big huge task, like it's a super complicated thing. Maybe make it seem a little less daunting. And when it comes to stuff like the non-metallic metal, it's easiest just to keep a few simple principles in mind. You want to have things reflecting. Light's important to reflect, obviously, but there's other stuff too. You want to maybe reflect some of the, yeah, see, this is almost kind of a wrap here. Less of a gauntlet, more of some type of a wrap. So we're just gonna, see, I might change this. I'm kind of changing back again now to something a little bit different. But we still have our, before that starts to get too dry, we are going to work on these parts of the snake body here. And what I'm trying to do is, this was, see how it got pretty much towards the cooler purple side, so I'm trying to See, warm that up a little bit. One reason is contrast. I think we've especially talked about it maybe in some of the earlier episodes, that contrast, many different ways to get it, not just light versus dark and not just green versus red, the typical opposites there. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Color intensity is another one. So you can have, say, a muted warm color like this next to a more intense cool color. That would be all of this fluorescent green. That would be your intense cool color. And I think you'll see as I move along here, also trying to establish some, it's almost, I don't want to say shading on individual segments, but it's close to it. Now you can start to see we've got warm highlights versus the cooler light coming from underneath. And I can always tone this down and see that starts to get feathered out a little bit. It seems a little bit too light. Now each one of these seems to have a little different, the body is a little bit different. Like here I see more of the segmented scale pattern on this front part of the chest than I did on the other ones. So that maybe, once again, you change direction, change course a little bit. So I'm doing that same thing here, and I know I've got them sitting around the top, but now we're starting to get a little bit of form and shape to this. And I'll even, let's see what happens if I lighten this up a little bit more. Lighten that up just a bit more. And I don't want to get too much towards highlights, but I just want to see where we're at in areas like this. Just to plan out, okay, it's as bright as I want this to get, or maybe there's still one more step lighter that I'll get there. But let's move on now, because we've got this blue waiting over here too. And that is gonna be part of our design here. And just bringing in some of these diamond patterns. Every so often going back to water there just to get it to flow the way we want. And now I'm going to start to pick out some of these individual scales here. So we'll go back to, remember, the lighter mixture that we were using on the front part of the scales. Go back to that. And this is a little bit in the darker section just to make sure that we've got some shading there too. And I can always tone it down. If I feel like it's too bright, I can say, you know what, that's too bright, or I just wipe most of it away. And in this case, it's going to get a little more of that blue highlight there. Some of these, they seem to have more of a pronounced ridge line or spine there on the back of the snake portion of the body than others. Just like I did on the other one. See here, I'm thinking there's reflection from the light of that object source lighting, that familiar. So that's something I just try to avoid. And you can take this as far as you want. You can be less involved with this, not even do a pattern at all. You can just have lights and darks here. Or you can just be, you can do even more elaborate details if you want. Because at a certain point, then you start to feel, okay, let's try and be a little more direct with our even lighter colors, and you can see how much lighter this is. I don't want this to be, see how that's, I'm breaking up that edge, that line a little bit. I don't want it to be rock solid, because if it is, boy, it's really going to capture an awful lot of attention in a place where there really shouldn't be an awful lot of attention. Because remember, if I overpower, I can only make things so light, even when it's fluorescent paint. And if you don't give yourself enough leeway to work with, now you're going to try to make things lighter and lighter and lighter and wonder why the heck nothing's going on. Even in these areas, I'm breaking up the lightest light, and if I feel like I need to go back over it with some dark, I can do that too. And I may even make adjustments after, I turn off the camera or something like that. So let's just gonna try and get some eyes in here. We went over the eyes on the initial painting video, so I won't get too involved in that. So here, this just it's not in an integral area here for your eyes, so I'm just putting more indications of the design than anything else. And now, even on this part, sorry, this wanders off camera. Still trying to find the ultimate best way to do all these, because every project or every figure is a little bit different. So one camera angle that works really well for one type of painting video almost doesn't work at all for another type. Depends on the shape of the miniature, the size of it. See, I'm just wandering around here. Not even when it gets to be some of those really deep interior shadow areas, I'm just not even gonna do too much with those whatsoever. So let's work on a few lights here. And this is supposed to be that champion figure, leader figure, whatever we want to call it. We could even give it some kind of spots on the face, whatever. I'm trying not to get this skin tone too light here, because it's not going to be much of a glow if everything around it is very light. What I'll do at a certain point here is I grab one or two of the other ones and do a similar thing here. So we'll set this one aside. As I've said many times before, we don't want to get too bogged down. So let's do a comparison here. So you can see in just about 15 minutes or so, see how one pattern now has a little bit more of an established look. So I'm going to cover up some of my liner paints here before they dry out too much. And you guys can use the wet palette thing. That's not for me. It's never been part of my process there. Now here I've got the darks. I can say they're mostly pretty well established. There's some areas I can see that could use a little more. I just added some there. And just like we did before, try to establish here we go. Get down into these shadow areas here, into the armor, just like we did on the other one here. Underside of the armor. Maybe a little bit on the arrow there. And then take it in the other direction. Start to add some of these warmer, lighter tones so you can see just how liquid that is. And the idea is that it will lighten some areas, but because this paint is formulated a lot like the clear paints, see how that becomes sort of a semi glaze right there. So I know when people ask me what color did you use there, what colors did you mix there, I can't tell them, because how could you tell them what colors were just mixed there? There was no mixing that happened. There was sort of a glaze on top of a glaze on top of a glaze. It wasn't really this, we used 5% of this and 10% of that, and it made this and that, and I can lighten this up. Again, I've got all the colors out here. You know, if I wanted to change this even a little bit and add some of the, was that the pale green that I've used in some of the mixtures here. Because maybe you don't want each of these to have the exact same color formulations on them. And you can take this as far as you want. There's many other things to do on the champion figure, and talking about the basing of these. So I don't want to necessarily repeat this stuff here, because you've seen this on that primary test figure. The stuff you haven't seen a lot is the trying to do the object source lighting part of it. But this does give you a sense of how I approach something like a freehand design on more than just one figure. I'm sure you found it's not like it's easy to do freehand on a figure, but doing it on one figure or maybe two of the exact same figure is one thing, but then repeating that pattern on different figures, because I've had to do this on a bunch of my armies. Even this one, its shape is so radically different than the one we were just working on. And there's other ones different from this. So let's get into some of these brighter colors here, and just like I did on the champion figure, start to refine these. And on the other one, I went back and forth several times. Like in this area, I went back with a little bit of a darker color. And over here. But it's all up to you. You have to assess your available time and say, well, there's all these really neat things I'd like to do, but sometimes you have to say, okay, there's 10 really neat things I want to do, but there's no way I'm going to get 10 things done, but maybe I can get 3 of those done. And you just pick those three aspects that you really want to show off, and you just focus in on those. And you emphasize those, and you just say, okay, well, I wanted to do other things, but time was only going to let me do this. So as I add those little dots in there for the eyes, you can just get a sense of how, and that's not a pure white either. Gives you a sense for how much leeway I've given myself with my lights and darks. I haven't even gone anywhere near white yet, and I've already got some really bright lights. Let's do that right here on this part. And you notice it's not a continuous highlight line here. It varies. And I'm going to do the same thing up here. And looks like it's a good spot. See it there. There. Now there's got this bow in the way, so I have to shift this around. Hopefully you can still see it. So I sort of save the brightest highlight there for just a few places. And like I've done before here, we've got our blue and red liner. And I can emphasize a few of like these spines here. Can water it down a bit. This is not really not a black lining, it's sort of a glaze there. And just throw it on sometimes and wipe it away. Or wipe, I'll leave some of it behind. But I'm trying to just give options for different approaches here, not absolutes. And I'll just... So now this is starting to be defined like our original champion figure, which I'm going to stride back to here. And just this, just going to leave a wash down in there and just let that be darker. There's just too many things going on there. I'm going to do the same thing here. Just throw a wash over that whole thing. It was just getting too bright. Had to knock it down. There's way too many other things of interest happening in the same zone. And this is where I'm going to try and get into the face here. So I'm looking at this and just seeing that as some kind of wrapping. So I'm going to, again, bring out a little bit of the orange rust. Didn't need a whole bunch of it, but I'm going to mix a little bit of this. And it's pretty watered down. This is something I'll tone down later. But it was kind of missing before. But then I can also, while I've got that color out, why not use it on some of these golds here? See how that, even that just starts to get softer right away. And can you see that? Now I think you can see it. And I'm just trying to get a little touch of reflected light on the inside of that. So you see how this little light that I just put right here. And we need reflections over here too. Trying to get the best angle for you to see. So we're getting a little bit of light there. I think most people, they think, well, okay, here's where we do all this stuff and then we do the object source lighting at the very end. And I think I've even already been able to show that it's only just a portion. You do it a little bit here and a little bit there, and you sort of do it as you go along. So we're going to stop here. Stop right here. And then we're going to do a little bit of more of the non-metallic, but then we really want to get into our object source lighting on the critter too. So we'll be back with that in the next chapter. So the next thing we want to mess around with here is some of that non-metallic metal. I've got a few added colors out here. It's more of the orange rust. Now we've got a little bit of that clear yellow. What that does is it doesn't just lighten this up, it helps to sort of intensify it a little bit. And that's important here because we want to find a few spots to make our goal a little bit brighter, but just like before, see how this is basically a semi-wash. It's on that transparent side of things. Transparent, translucent, however maybe you want to describe it, but in any case, it is not your lightest light. So I think, yeah, I've got this about where you can see it. So I don't want this to be necessarily very bright. I also have to think, well, there's light reflecting from underneath. So it's making all of this one much more complex than some of the others. So I'm just working some of this in. I'll get some brighter tones here. Same thing with that little chevron that's right there. You'll notice that I haven't reached for anything that's white yet. So here on the scabbard slash quiver array, I'm just gonna a little bit here, and I still have some of that light color left. And I can even work with there. Some of my green here. Let's get this. Now you can see it. So I'm trying to get as a little light reflected here on the underside. So even when you're thinking about, okay, it's the metallic, well, I have to think about the whole thing. What's being reflected. So we've got this green glow here. And one way I want to differentiate it a little bit from the glow that's coming from underneath. I'm adding a little bit of yellow here. And remember what we talked about with this fluorescent green. It's super, super thick, so it needs to be thinned down. And I have to think, so which parts of this armor are going to catch some of that glow? And I know this is about the non-metallic, but hey, if it's hitting the arm too, better do that. So and we're going to add a little bit to this side of the helmet here. And this is maybe one of those ways where you don't get so scared about adding the non-metallic or the object source lighting to your non-metallic, because there's already a good chunk of that object source lighting out here. So you don't feel like, well, gee, I did all this work just to do this non-metallic stuff and it went south with the object source lighting. Here we go. So we're just gonna encourage a few of these brighter accents like so. Just along here. So it's, see the difference here where these lights are much warmer, more orange, but on this side it just has that greenish, more of a greenish tint to it. But it's not necessarily, doesn't hit you in the face that, okay, boom, all of a sudden here's a bunch of green. It kind of gradually moves in that direction. And even here's the, okay, yes, it's supposed to be the non-metallic stuff, but I'm doing it here on the skin too. Because I've got this color out here. And I want to say, okay, if this is the brightest glow here on the familiar, well, I'm not quite sure I want my reflected light to be lighter than that. So we've talked about that context an awful lot. And this is one of those ways you set that context. This is a little bit about that color temperature. You've got that bluish here. Now to have a slightly warmer green, putting some light on it, you're going to end up with a little more contrast that way. We're always just, it's this constant seeking out ways to get that enhanced contrast. Now I didn't know if that back of the head there was supposed to be part of the helmet or not. Just not sure. So let's see what other parts. Yeah, this needs some right here. I don't know if you can even see that. It's part of the scabbard thing. The scabbard / quiver. Now here's where I'm going to try and get something that's a highlight, more so not because of the familiar, just because there needs to be, if this is going to be a metal thing here. Now, so we've got a highlight there, but now we've got to darken this down somehow. I'm actually going to mix a little bit of the So even though the fluorescent green is part of the glow, you see how that's starting to darken that down. There's a little bit of that green liner to do even a little bit more. See how that darkened that down a little bit? And now there's sort of a light, dark, light that's going on. And then on the underside there, that's sort of your light that's coming up from underneath. The light that's coming from above. We'll make that be a bit bolder. Over here, you can see how watery some of this is. That's really by intent. That's not an accident. So again, while I have is I wanted to try and break it down into clean, you know, you do this, you do this, you do this. That's just not how I approach these things. I think that it helps keep it from getting too boring. So now we're going to get into a few brighter areas here. So I'm going to get rid of some of the excess here. And this is that clear yellow mixed with my off-white. Because I have all these darks here, these, and even the midtones, see how those few little dots, they show up a little bit more on the top of this little piece of armor here. So now I bring out some of these, a few of these touches of light, and I still have yet to mess around with white at all. Just like in the color, actually even more. So now when you're into the unit as a whole, you don't want to get locked down just on one aspect of one miniature. Part of that is you'll get bored, and it'll become a grind, and you're just less likely to want to finish what you're working on. I do hope that's something that happens too with this, is that the unit painting is a little bit more fun, for you, less laborious. So you can tell we've got all these lights and darks here. Let's see if I can. It's almost like a greenish yellow here. Let's see what kind of a dark I can get on this part of the helmet here, and then go back to something that's a little bit lighter. So this again is kind of on the watery side. Get some of that out of there, and I'm just gonna just push some of that around. And then a few accents there. Now let's get this other side, because this also needs to be getting some lights, but this is not going to have any of that green in it for obvious reasons. But it's the usual where I focus in on the top things to get that little bit of a line. Getting more than the greens and blues on this side. Keeping things a little bit darker overall in a way. So I'm actually going to grab some of this red liner that I've got sitting here and try and get some more darks right here. Like so, right there. A little bit there. A little bit there. Just enhances that contrast. Not much more. Now I need some. Let's see what happens now when we do. Again, I'm pushing some things, advancing some things a little bit more than I would in a certain time frame. But I'm going to want this out here too for the fluorescent stuff, which we'll get to in a second. But see with that white, good, still on camera. I know it's fuzzy. Like I said earlier, I'll see if I can establish a separate camera for the palette, but I don't know if there's enough room here in the work area for it. So this is where I'm going to try and get a few really bright highlights. But see, they still have a color to them. It's still not pure white. There's still some of that clear yellow mixed in. And along the top of the helmet ridge here. This one too. And top of this other part of the bow. And fortunately, wherever I have a decent amount of darks established, yeah, that's going to give me a little bit of a highlight. So again, here I have plenty of the mid-tones in there. I'm trying with some of these highlights, get some shapes. I'm not quite sure you can even see what it is I'm doing here. So yeah, there's a few of these, and there's an awful lot going on with some of these, and it's just not easy to get my fingers in the right place and the miniature in the right place and the brush in the right place all at the same time. So before I forget, now this is that glow from underneath, and I just want to get a little bit here. Looks like you can see it. And this is just how translucent the fluorescent paint is. I didn't really water it down necessarily. It kind of acts like a bit of a wash all on its own. So there you have it. There's some green reflections on the underside of the snake bow here. Just trying to be subtle about it. Can even see I've got some here on the hair. There may be a few spots. Even this, it still has a little bit of the yellow in it. And just to give it enough of a color. And we talked earlier in that first piece about the hard edge versus soft edge, and we're starting to make some of that presence felt too, now that we're further along with this, getting closer towards. So see, now as I have the white here, can bring out some of what's on the arm here. And it just seemed to be some kind of wrapping, I guess, maybe from the bowstring or whatever, give it a little protection from that, although it is just some Medusa. I'm not sure how much protection it has to worry about from bowstrings, but such as it is. So there's a little more on the, just a touch on the face there. Get a little more here. And I can always have these colors out so that I can always, if I feel I need to, either warm something up, tone something down. Don't feel like you can't just take your finger and use that to blend something in. So we'll stop here with the champion figure. We'll compare it to this one here. So you can see how we developed metals a little bit more, even with the glow. So what we're going to do is get to the dragon here and try and define that final, what we want to do with him and what kind of, just how dark we want these darks to be on him to make the glow stand out more. We're really going to utilize our clear green an awful lot on that too. So I'll get to that in just a second. Since we have the white and the fluorescent green out on the palette, this is a pretty good time to fool around with those lighting effects, especially on our familiar. And you'll see when I do this, I'm going to mix up the white, the fluorescent green together, a little bit of that clear yellow. And we'll see just how much brighter this gets here on our familiar. So yeah, that's even, wow, that even gets brighter. It seems to have some of the same scale designs on it that the rest of the figure does. So what I'm trying to do here now is get some of the lighting on the things like the hand here. Get some of these fingers. The object source lighting, hopefully you'll see that it's something that I have a tendency to work back and forth on. I don't just make a glow lighter and lighter and lighter. Sometimes I'll make the glow lighter, and then sometimes I'll tone it down and then bring some of it back again. So here on the hair, you can see I'm bringing out more of the glow. But this is very, see just how translucent this stuff is. It doesn't take much though. Does not take very much. And I always have some of the original fluorescent out there. This is where I tone down some things sometimes. The arm here just needs a little bit of a glow, but if I just use the greens, I'll tone that down. I can go back to my lighter color now. But we can also darken this down. But I also have to remember there's other places that need a glow. Depending on which one of these bases that we use, sometimes you pick a design, well, okay, it may cover it, but if I wanted to get more lighting under here, well, that one probably not so much, but some of these clearly have a little more of that design showing, so maybe that's also going to yield a little more opportunities to establish a glow. That's what I'm doing down here on the underside. I do think, yeah, it's starting to show up on camera here a little bit. Trying to get that to be a little more intense where it's closest to where that particular light source is going to be, but you can see this is nowhere near, even though it looks light down here, it's nowhere near as light as what we worked with by that familiar light source. And this is one of those things, if you haven't really done this before, it's something that'll happen gradually. You probably won't straight away go, oh yeah, this is how you do it. It may take some trial and error. Maybe you don't do this many glows on one thing. I know I think to this day my record for light sources on a single figure is somewhere in the neighborhood of 17. Most of them in the same color family. There's been a few figures that I think the most different color light source I had was, I think it was 3 or something like that, different color light sources. So here we're just looking for a little reflected light. And over here, see, I had to think too, where would this cast in a bizarre way? Where is it casting a shadow? So I need that to be dark down in there. Before I forget about the clear green, I want to show what that'll do. and the scourge of the clogged container. And when that happens, I always have about 50 of these things handy. Just a push pin here, in case I haven't already talked about that a bazillion times. The clear green is nice because it's still an intense green, especially if I mix a touch of the fluorescent with it. But what it'll do is sort of acts like a little bit of a super transparent glaze, but it's very intense. So now that it's almost like it's like embers, where the embers are darker. And that's just not, it's not all just bright glow like a candle or something like that. The embers sometimes are kind of dark. They're not actually very light, but there's this transparency to them, and that's what's happening here with that green, that clear green mixed with some of the fluorescent. And see a little more here. Here too. And then as I branch out, I can tone down even some of the stuff that I've put on the helmet here. So there on that side, gave it that. Continue. Here on the side of the head that's getting some of that greenish light, and so they're toning that down a bit. So we've got this green sort of bouncing around here. Let's get out. There's actually green liner paint, but trying to keep the colors down here. I don't want to bombard you with too many colors, but guess what? That blue liner mixed with the green, not too shabby either. So see how this starts to darken this down. Darkens it down, but it doesn't kill the luminescence of it. If that's a word, I'm going to say that it is. So we need some, again, with the clear green, I'm almost basically glazing some shadow colors in here. Let's get that on the camera where you can see it. And that's better. Now, this is something that I planned on all along. It's a little bit difficult for me to tell you about it in advance and describe it in advance. It's just something you kind of have to see. And obviously there's only so much that I can do on camera here. Just there are some awkward angles for me. Sometimes I just have to kind of take the miniature and put it where I need it to be. So I've still got my brighter green down here. It's going to be tough for you to see. That's why some of the things you might come back and you'll see that there's something on the figure that maybe wasn't there before. It's just the reality of it, where I have to do something like this, where again it's tough for you to see what's going on here, but you need to see. Sometimes you just need to see the overall effect of it. It's not so important that you see the one or two brush strokes. Sometimes the result of those brush strokes is a little bit more important. And this fluorescent paint you'll have to play around with it a little bit, get used to it. It's got a mind of its own sometimes. It can be a little bit temperamental. See here, this is kind of on the thick side. I think people, they know it's very translucent, but they forget how thick it is. And sometimes it's hard for them to wrap their mind around that notion that something which is so bright and intense and transparent is also so thick. So now that I see, by toning that down with those green glazes, I can hit a few of these things, like these fingers, with some highlights. I think that's whatever the rope slash chain, whatever is. So now we've got even that much more of an intense glow. I'll do some of this, and I know on camera it almost doesn't look like anything's happening there, but there is. And a few touches here. Let's get a little white in there as I get down to possibly an area that's right where some of the glowing runes are. Alright, here, I'm just going to pick up a few of these. A little bit here. So I think you can see now there's a little more of a highlighting to the glow on the underside of the snake part of the body. Always trying to keep in mind, I want to mix in the fluorescent green, and in some ways these really darker areas, if I want to call it that, of the glow, it's almost more important to have the fluorescent in there than at the lightest portions, because that's what gives it that ember style glow. And I think maybe this will also show I didn't get too intense with the detailing on the snake scales. Boy, can you see this? I think you'll be able to see this. Because, yeah, I needed to have some glow here too. And some here on these scales also, because again, they're facing upwards. So I've got glow on the bottom now. Now I've got to get glow on the top. I hope you can. Now maybe you can see some of those, but we're going to grab some of our clear green here to tone that down, because boy, and see how dark that looked on the palette. But look at how light it's going to be here. Sometimes if there's just too much paint on there, you gotta take some of it away. And I can see some over here that just needs a little of that, and now we're going to break out that clear green again. Gonna get out some of that blue liner. And darken down a few things here. Again, I hope you can see what it is I'm trying to do here. I'm going to put this over the top and then wipe some away. And what it's going to do is strengthen some of my greenish glow. It's coming from above. And that tail needs to be much darker on the familiar there. So I'm just trying to encourage the viewer to think of that as some type of glowing ember. And while I have it, darkening some of this down. Back here, I'm gonna try and shade some of this. See, we've got a little more light to dark to light here now. And if I add more of the blue liner, so now I'm encouraging a little contrast here with the hand. Gonna go back to this is a little bit blue and red liner mixed together. I just want to sharpen this edge and draw out a little more contrast. And let's see, gonna get some of the red liner here. Try and get myself a little bit of... There we go. This line needs to be strengthened a little bit here, that shadow line. Same thing on this section here. Again, not even sure if you can see some of these things, so I apologize for that. I'm going to go back in. And yeah, this is an area that's supposed to be generating all that glow, but I also wanted to have some decent contrast. And let's strengthen some of these lines down here. Alright. So again, I don't want to take this too far in, because this is supposed to be about units, and if it's too many hours per figure, well, then you're going to be less inclined to want to do this kind of stuff on your units and your armies. So what I'm going to do is get the stuff that I need, my drill and some glue here, and we'll get this stuck onto a base for you. And then we'll have some final thoughts as we stick the rest of the unit onto their bases as well. We've got ourselves a pretty decent glowing effect there, and I'm glad that we chose to do that as a nice glowing bright familiar. So we'll be back with the tools, and we'll stick around that base in just a little bit. So we're going to throw this on a base, and like we talked about before, we have to figure out which ones we want. Now these two had pretty dramatic designs on them here, but there were two things. First, I like to have unit champions on tower bases. So here's one you can see the difference in the height here between these two. We also talked about something that tries to accommodate the footprint, and this should be just enough here to hold that on. This one is really neat. It has a lot of bright glowing stuff, but it's almost even a little bit larger for this figure. So I think there was another one that I had it in mind to save it for, is maybe this one right here. So that way I can get some more glow on the underside of this also. And we're going to save this one for this one here. Now what I've got here, a few tools. The pin vise and my snipper right here. I try to use a heavy duty thing like this because of the paper clips. This is the thing that I think I didn't have with me when we were doing the basing part of this. So this is a jeweler's block. And then you can see all these little holes in here. Those are actually drill holes. This is what I assemble all my figures with. I do all my carving. It's one of the ways I keep myself actually from slicing myself. So all of the cutting happens to this instead of my fingers. And what I'll do is I'm going to get this thing off of here. Now hopefully it just kind of comes off intact. There we go. So I've got my little piece of pin. Now it's a little bit shorter than what I normally have, but this is a really light figure, so it doesn't need a whole lot to hold it down. And now I have to figure out just where it's going to go on here. And there's a couple of things I can do. I can put a dot of white paint here and then hold it over the top and see exactly where I want it to go. Now, I think you can see from above here, pretty much either got to go this way with it, or more likely something like this. Right, this is going to touch this portion. So what I can do is just kind of indicate where that's going to go. Got my drill bit here. You can see the Sculpey is really easy to drill through. Don't need to go too far since that's sort of a shorter pin. Before I stick the glue on there, I learned the hard way. Find out if this is where I want this to be, because I've done it, and it says some even now I'll just forget, and I all of a sudden figure out, yeah, that's not quite where I wanted that to be glued. So that all looks pretty level also. See, pretty level to the base. So now that I know where that's going to go, I can pop this off of here. You can see how that held it on pretty good, even without any glue. And this is just basic super glue here, so I'm just going to hit these flat parts with it. Get this back onto my base. And as the glue dries, again, I got some of my pin vise, some of these other things out of the way here. So I could still even paint on this if I wanted to. Now if I wanted to paint on this thing, you've seen me use things like these. Basically dead paint containers and blue tack. So let's say you got it on the base, and there's some things you wanted to touch up. So we'll throw some blue tack on here. And now we'll get the figure stuck on that. So you see now I could go back in and still do some more painting on this. Now the reason I didn't essentially start out this way, I'm going to get my jeweler's block out of the way here. It's because I wanted you to see how I try to get to some of these things on the undersides. But I can still get in here and make modifications. So I'm not going to touch this here. So see, there's like some glue over here. Definitely don't want to get super glue on my brush. Now if it's one of the craft brushes, well, I just take some rubbing alcohol and that'll clear that right up, no big deal. But the Winsor Newtons are a little bit pricier, so best not to get the super glue on those. So now I can, you know what, I'm going to go in and darken a few things. Maybe this is something where I've done this too. You just absolutely have to have it for a game or a tournament or whatever. So you do what you can in the time you've got, and then you just say, you know what, after the event, whatever, I'm going to go back in. And I'm going to refine some things, and that's what I'm doing here. It's probably going to be that much harder for you to see now because that's one of the reasons why I didn't have it on. The old dead paint jars. But still, it gives you enough to hang on to where I can go in. So I'm adding some sharper defined edges in places. Along here. It's ran into a thing where that's becoming matches too much. I need this to be darker here. See, I'm toning this down because it's further away from where the light source is. This is an adjustment so I can make it here because there's not as many runes right there. Not as many glowing runes, so why not just tone it all down? And then over here, maybe where there's something brighter, well, it's just the opposite. Let's get out some of the fluorescent green again. Like this. And I'll take a little bit of the white in here too. And we'll make an adjustment on this. And brighten this up just a touch. Again, I want to avoid any super glue. But I felt like that is a good place to bring back some of that lighter, color. And just bringing back some of my lighter tones here on the familiar. Because it seemed like it needed to have some of those come back. Same thing on this armor edge here. Maybe on some of the fletching on your arrows. Again, gotta stay away from super glue. Just a few dots there. So I think we're pretty good on most areas here. So what I'll do is have some of the other ones do some of the finished things on them and stick them on their bases, and you can see how the whole unit looks together. Yeah, even on some of these, I'm just, why not? Sometimes you have to push the effect a little bit farther, maybe. And after all, this is a fantasy thing. I don't think you'll find too many of these out on the street. Maybe you will, but you don't live on the same street that I live on. A few more extra bright things in here. A few more highlights on the armor again. If this wanders off camera, I apologize. These are the toughest things to get on screen, because this is mostly the areas where I have to really get this thing pretty close to me to see what's going on. So there we have our unit champion to go along with our other finished Medusa here. So we'll just let this one dry up, and we'll be back with some final thoughts on our whole unit of Medusae. So here we are at the tail end of what we're going to do with this unit. What we're doing is just picking out some final details. We got the hair here. Been mixing some lighter colors. Now that we have a pretty good sense of where we want some of these final highlights to be on the value scale, just got that mint green mixed with a little bit of that sky blue. Just finding a few places where I can drop that for a couple of lighter colors here, just to add a little extra interest every so often. So we've got some of the face details on these now. Again, you can especially refer back to the first one to get some of that, but you can see what I'm doing here. I'd also done this on that first one to scatter around, get a little more color high. You just can't have that blue only on the hair. So I'm adding a little bit here. We've got some of the other ones. We can do a similar type thing here. We can try and find a few brighter highlights on the hair. Not a lot, because if the hair becomes the brightest thing, well, your metals, especially your object source lighting, that could suffer a little bit. So that's why I'm mainly, speaking of that, I see that I need a little more light here. Somehow that kind of went away. Maybe I was working on something else. Just finding a few areas where I can drop some of this bluish highlight that's not just on the hair. Trying to think of the flow of this. Even just finding a few spots right there. And you can do this depending on what you want. You can do this, a lot of this, you can do a little bit. And you can see I've got these stuck on the container lids here, so these could have theoretically already been used in a game or two or at a tournament, whatever. And see, once you just kind of say, okay, that's it. We're done. You can take these guys off here, like so. Comes off no problem. And I'm just going to throw a clean palette sheet out here, and maybe we can get a little better sense of what these all look like. So how about that? Let's get our unit of 5 out here. Get things out of the way. So you can see our bases. They pretty well go together. And we've got our champions and then more of our regular types here. In fact, oh yeah, I guess this was the first one that I did. I was having trouble telling which ones that I did. So you can see they all go together. They're all consistent. You can see here where, as I turn this one upside down, where I try to focus where there's more glow here. Try to get a little more glow on the underside of the snake. And I tried to position this one here, and I get myself a little something to point with. So you can see how that is bright right there, but there's a reason for that because we've got some hefty glow here. If I had it sitting on top of where this black part is, that would not make as much sense. So I wanted to have some of this glowing. This kind of sets off some of this red behind it, so we're going to talk about that contrast again. There's a contrast in value, but also you have the red in this bright green. So remember the muted, warm, with the very saturated cool color on top. And I'll do is I'm gonna snap some photos of these, and then they'll be in the credits for you to see. So you can check these out, and they will also, finished images will be on the blog too, so you can get a little better view of that. There is also, I think it's the $100 level where you get to have the hard copy of the video on a USB, plus you get to pick one of the miniatures to have. So there's our unit of 5. Thanks again for watching this. I know it's been several hours of video for you to see, but hopefully this gives you a better way to sort of plan out how you want these things to play out with the basing, deciding what to do with your unit champions, and that sort of thing. So I will catch you on next month's video, and that one is going to entail something a little bit different. We've got the bolt action Russians, but the basing on that is something you'll be able to use for anything, for sci-fi, fantasy, steampunk, whatever. So if anything else, you'll get some, and it's an oil painting one. So I think you'll get some valuable tips out of that, even though it may not be what you're actually working on, because not everybody is working on Dark Elves either. But object source lighting, gold non-metallic, and other things, freehand, basing, we all need that. So thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.